Hello there. Today I have the privilege of having Jessica Lord with me. How are you doing, Jessica?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good, and thank you for, again, taking time. I think it's a little over 3 p.m. in London. It's 7 o'clock, a little over 7 o'clock in the morning here for me in Canada. So it's fantastic to speak with you. Jessica, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah. Hi, I am Jessica Lord. Let's see, sometimes I feel like it's very hard to say I am a blank. I've changed a lot of what I am over the years, but I'm definitely a technology person who very into open source and making the web in general more approachable, making it easier to onboard, making it easier for people to realize they can do small things themselves if they want to, and trying to make building something easier and also in collaboration.
Fantastic. Collaboration is the key word, right? So,
yeah.
And Jessica, I usually, at this point of the beginning of the interview, I usually ask my guests how the technology and computers come into their life. But in your case, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a different question. I'm going to ask you, how did architecture and design come into your life?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it had always been there. My dad is a builder, and my parents were always thinking about a house. And I grew up in a for people that do have an idea of this, like very typical American suburb context where suburbs with cul-de-sacs were popping up all the time. So there were always houses under construction around us. And my parents were just always so interested in houses and house layouts and stuff. And so I feel like most weekends growing up, we were going and just walking through under construction houses and like thinking about, my parents would be pointing out the layout and where things were. And so I think I probably got into it that way. But I also, was always interested in tech, and actually that was the one thing I would get in trouble for. I was a pretty good child, but my parents got our first computer, I think in like 1996 or something. My dad got it to help him sort of level up at work, but then I was glued to it all the time, and I wouldn't take eye breaks, as my mom called them, when I was supposed to. And so that's what I would get in trouble for, because I was just glued. I spent my allowance on, I remember, this really thick early HTML book. And so I was always doing that as well. My mom was actually surprised I didn't go to college for computer science. And this is something I have thought a lot, like now that my career ended up shifting that way. I think it was just, I grew up in such a small town in Georgia, and I didn't know anybody else who knew about computers. I had no one to talk to about computers. I was on MIRC talking to, people on the internet about computers and kind of teaching myself things, but I don't think I had any idea what an actual career in computers looked like, or that was possible. But, in my head, I knew what architecture was.
Do you remember how you got exposure to your first programming language?
I genuinely don't, and I am trying to rack my brain and memory, because I don't know, and I don't even know who first told me, about to download IRC, back then. But I started by writing scripts in IRC, and I didn't even realize until years later that was Perl. Like, I didn't have the understanding that was actually a specific language. I was just sort of taking it apart and figuring out, like, by reading another script, figuring out how to tweak it to make the script that I want. So I started doing it that way, writing, what I realize now was Perl, but I didn't know then. And then I remember there was a few websites. There was one called like Sheet Clicks or something like that. That was, people were posting tips on how to build web pages and stuff. So I think through that, I figured out what HTML was, which led me to buy that big orange HTML book. I remember very vividly, and I was putting flags and page markers in it. And so I was doing a lot of different things all over the place while really having no context of like
Yeah.
what the strict definition of a programming language was, or what front end or back end was. But I was just sort of taking apart things and tinkering and trying to make things that I wanted work.
Yeah, it's incredible how life progresses and how things come up to you, right? So, but you went to university to study architecture, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And at what point in time did you make the switch to computers and technology?
I mean, it was still much later after that, but it was never sort of absent from my life. And there are things now I think of that should have been bigger flags. I mean, besides the obvious, like I used to love being on the computer so much that I would get in trouble for it was, one of the flags. And then in university, I went to a very engineering heavy school. And so everyone there, no matter your major, you had to take a computer science class to graduate. And that was my easiest A in university. Like I butted heads with my architecture professors a lot. And so architecture was challenging in its own ways because it's very subjective architecture, whereas like engineering and like physics and things often have just a very clear answer. So architecture was hard in that respect. That was very subjective. But I remember when all my other architecture classmates also had to take the computer science class, and they were moaning and they hated it, and it was so difficult. And I was just like, what don't you guys get about this? And we had to program in Python, so Java and Python for that class. And yeah, it was my easiest class, and I breezed through it. I tried to take like a few more technology classes, but still throughout university, still didn't feel like I had an idea of like what actually a full-time job in programming was like. And so I was still steady on architecture, and I graduated. I started at an architecture firm, but I loved learning new software. The first architecture firm I worked at, we were using what at the time was new, which is BIM, Building Information Modeling software. So moving on from CAD to a more layered and complex software. And I loved learning that software. And so it always kind of stayed with me. And then after my first architecture job, I'd always really also wanted to go into urban design rather than architecture. I still like architecture. I just found urban design interested me more because it was more, I just felt like I could change lives for the better more than I could by designing a single house or apartment building. And so I applied for a job with the city of Boston for urban design, and their urban design was actually called Urban Design Technology Group. And so I just thought, this is perfect. And so when I got that job and moved to Boston, I was also working with, GIS systems and doing like shadow study. So I loved that it was still a very techie kind of role. And then I was using my real Mod Podge of web skills. I was building websites for the city's different planning initiatives we had and things like that. So it was still always with me, but it still did not click to me that I couldn't visualize what a full-time job in software could be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what point in time did you make the jump to your first development kind of a job?
Yeah, so I had been at the city of Boston doing the urban design work for a few years, and I actually kind of felt frustrated that there wasn't as much technology as I'd wanted in the technology group. And around at a certain point, a program was created in the US called Code for America, which was a fellowship program. So they would get city-minded folks, designers, and developers together to spend a year away from their jobs, building open source software for city governments. And this was another thing I kept trying to push when I was at the city. And again, I didn't have a concept of what open source was then, but I realized, later that those open source ideas were what I was trying to push. I was trying to push that we should be more open as a city about the things the successes and failures we've had, because a lot of cities are trying the same things. A lot of cities have the same problems. We should be talking about them and collaborating more about it. And that was a really foreign idea to people in government. And again, at the time, I didn't know that this was an open source kind of way of thinking, but I found out about Code for America because their first year they partnered with the city of Boston. So we had fellows in the city of Boston. And I remember thinking, almost not applying for it myself for the next year, because I was just like, I'm a creative. I really still couldn't imagine myself on a computer all day, even though that's exactly what I did all day as an urban designer, was sit at the computer. But I just decided, it's free to apply. Says, I should just apply. And I applied, and by the time I found out I got it, I had really felt like, all right, I need to do something that's going to, because I felt like I hadn't sort of scratched the itch for all the technology stuff I had wanted at that job. So I thought, okay, I'm going to spend a year, just in the deep end, focused on tech for cities, and then I'll go back to government. And so I got that fellowship. I had to move to San Francisco, which is about, I don't know how many thousands of miles, but it's the opposite side of the country from Boston. And it was the farthest away I'd been from home in Georgia too. So I moved to San Francisco to do that year-long fellowship. And that really, the exposure, that was 2012. So I really feel like I landed in San Francisco, the right place at the right time, because so much was going on then. And there was so much in open source and early Node JS. And I fell right into that through this fellowship. And that was really the game changer for me, was getting that exposure, actually meeting people who were software engineers and learning more about like what that actually looks like as a job. And it felt like the things people were doing felt so much faster than the work in government, which can often take, years to realize. And so I just got really energized that year, meeting with lots of people who, were in open source and early Node, who had ideas and, built them over the weekend and stuff. And we're really trying to build up Node, and it got me energized. And so after that fellowship year, I was like, okay, well, if I still spend like a few more years having fun in tech, it will only benefit my urban design career. So I'll just do a few more years. And that was, however, 2012. So that was that long ago. And I have not gone back to urban design. I've been in tech since.
Fantastic. It's I always find fascinating how people, something happens in their life, but for you, the whole America thing, right? So you're doing your Perl scripts. That was the beginning of your introduction there to programming.
Yeah.
But you always had the bug on you. So the bug, maybe not the best expression, but you had that desire for understanding technology and using technology and building websites, and that kind of led you on that path, which is super interesting. And how did things evolve for you until in San Francisco until you got to GitHub eventually, right?
Yeah, so GitHub really followed my Code for America year. I found out much later because also, I should say, during my Code for America year, being with a bunch of open source nerds and full-time programmers is when I really started being more online, obviously putting stuff on GitHub and just talking about what I was making, just making a ton of side projects and talking about it. And then I had my Code for America project that I had done, and I guess had been visible enough that some people at GitHub had seen it. And so they had actually reached out to me asking if I'd want to talk to them about working at GitHub. And so, yeah, that's how it happened. And I went through my interviews, and yeah, that was the moment I was like, okay, I'll just do a few more years in tech. I'll just get this GitHub job and then go back.
That's fantastic. So they invited you to join GitHub, and was Electron in progress at the time, or did Electron start after that?
That was
well,
still a few years later. I mean, internally at GitHub, it had started, I don't remember exactly what year now it had started, but it was a different small team at GitHub when I originally joined GitHub. I mean, this was in 2013. Things in San Francisco and tech were so different than they were today. And so my job offer literally said front end superstar. Like, it wasn't even a real job title. And GitHub, was trying to make the point of it was a flat, no managers. They were really trying to do things differently. So things were kind of wild at the beginning. So it was just kind of like, you got hired to be a web developer there, and you just went to the main repo and you found an issue to work on. It was very wild. And so at some point there was like a smaller group working on what would become Electron and Atom, but they were kind of working in secret. They would only give internal updates every now and then. And so I didn't even know much of what was going on for a really long time. But in my free time, I was writing a lot of JavaScript in Node, and I was doing conference talks and talking about my essentially side projects in Node. And then people would be like, oh, I didn't know GitHub did Node. And I was like, well, they don't. And this is not even, I don't write Node at work. And eventually I was like, I would like to write JavaScript at work, because GitHub is a very heavy Ruby shop. And so eventually the Atom had launched, and so it was a bigger team by then. And there was just some point when I was like, okay, if I want to write JavaScript at work, I'm going to have to move to this team. And so that was kind of the reason, the impetus for moving to the Atom team. And then as I joined the Atom team, that was my first, is building desktop apps hard? Is building desktop apps on multiple platforms hard? I had not been in that world, so I had never thought about it, for a second. And so it was me onboarding to the Atom team that I realized, the process the Atom team had gone through to make this desktop app, the sort of Goldilocks scenario of like, this is too much of this is too much of this, we're going to have to make our own thing. And so the more I worked on Atom, the more I felt like Atom's underlying library, which was, at first called Atom Shell, I felt like that was the actual game changer. I still loved Atom, the text editor. I think visually it was the best text editor.
I use Atom. I think everybody liked Atom, so we still miss Atom.
Yeah. But I felt like at the end of the day, though, it was, a text or code editor, and there were other ones of those and things. And I felt like Atom Shell was actually the game changer. So I just kept pushing for it. And people were very, very narrowly focused on Atom. Atom was the dream. Having this collaborative desktop code editor had been the dream. So they were focused on that. And I was sort of nagging people, and I just started to do, and this was a time when in hindsight again, I was like, I was doing product stuff, and I didn't know I was doing product stuff. And definitely at that point at GitHub, we didn't even have a strong structure for like, product was this, and this was engineering managing, because it was still in that flux time of kind of a free-for-all. But I just started talking to more users and some friends who were using Electron, and started using it myself. And I kept pushing. I started building roadmaps, prioritizing bugs and features, and I just didn't stop. and so eventually I wore them down to get the ability to spend my full time on Electron work. And so that was the first step. And we had one engineer who was working on the code itself at the time too. And then I got my time to spend on the Electron, the whole overall project. And then just it started to gain more traction, and it was nice because I got to focus on the things I thought were important. And again, at that time, there was not a ton of structure, so I was able to kind of get away with it. And so I got to really prioritize what I thought should be prioritized in terms of building an open source project and do it the way I thought it should be done, talk about it, give talks and diagrams and tutorials and things like that the way I thought it should be done. And so that's how the Electron stuff started.
That's fantastic. It's always interesting to see how such a huge project, right, which a huge impact as well came up, right? So it's like pushing and some people getting together, an idea coming up, and there's so many apps that came to being what they are today because of Electron. Right? Slack is another example, right? Visual Code Studio, it's another one. Huge impact, right? So that
VS Code is why actually Electron ended up getting renamed from Atom Shell to Electron, because the team, it was before Microsoft acquired GitHub, but someone had reached out to us and said that they were working on the text editor on Atom, and they were going to talk about it or launch it and talk about it at a conference. And we thought, okay, well, since you can build many different things besides a text editor with Atom Shell, it shouldn't be tied, in name to Atom GitHub's text editor. So as a team, we, had to vote on what we thought its name should be. But that was actually the impetus moment for, okay, it needs its own name now because people are doing other stuff with it. And so that's how, then it got picked Electron because Atom and that whole universe of elements.
So the name was people voting for the name?
Yeah, it was not a serious vote. It was just like the few of us on the team had a few options, and we were like, which one of these should it be? But we just knew it needed a different name so that everything that in the future was built with it wasn't sort of tied back to a text editor. So that's how it got its own name.
Fantastic. And Jessica, you mentioned that open source had a huge impact in your life. Eventually, open source is what brought you to GitHub. And Electron grew up, and it's a huge open source project as well, right? And what can you tell us about the best practice to get a open source community together and inclusive community, welcoming community? What would you recommend to people that are interested in setting up an open source community?
Documentation. And that was one of the first things I worked on when I got my full-time on Electron. Was I think a lot of times, and it's understandable, engineers who are very excited about the novel technology they're creating are just interested in the technical problems. Documentation is in the back of their mind. It sort of happens last minute or not at all. But for me, I wanted to make documentation first priority. And so that was one of the first things I did, was go through the existing documentation we had, standardize it, making sure it was using the least amount of jargon we could use, and making sure it was clearly written. And I made, a standard for how, functions should be documented and everything, so that all of the documentation was consistent. And so that was the first big piece to me, was to just make sure our documentation was complete and read well and was easy to understand and was standardized and consistent. The other piece was, in a big open source project, especially that early in the project, it's constantly changing. And so I wanted our documentation to be able to stay up to date. And so I then worked on creating a documentation pipeline that was as easy as possible for us to maintain, so that there wasn't a ton of moving parts, so that updating the documentation wasn't going to then, I didn't want us to start out with good documentation and then it also then fall behind, because keeping the documentation up to date was such a chore. And so making a really streamlined documentation pipeline that basically just got built every time Electron was built and Electron shipped with the documentation was another piece. Another important piece for me was building demo apps, because, you know, Electron's different in that, you know, it's bridging Node and HTML and the rendering library of Chromium and putting them all together. And what does that mean? And so actually showing people, okay, what's like, if you're new to desktop applications, what's a native, you know, dialogue and that kind of thing, and actually building a demo app to show people what that meant, what, you know, a native save dialogue is like, and so that they could actually click through in that demo app and see these things of, oh, okay, I can now make the link of like, this is what this, you know, desktop terminology means in terms of the action. So that was another big thing for me, was actually just making something that people could get into and start seeing what some of these things meant. Because to me, a big thing was, you know, getting web developers to realize that they could use their web skills to build desktop apps. So having to introduce them to, okay, what is all of this lingo in the desktop world? Another big piece for me was basically how to initialize an Electron app. And this had some friction internally, because I think a lot of, you know, GitHub developers, having been in the Ruby on Rails world, really wanted to kind of mock that exactly. And I managed to spend a lot of time at GitHub not writing in Rails too, so not that. But the times I tried, there were bits that really frustrated me, and like knitting a Rails project and having all of these folders all automatically there and being like, well, what's this folder for? What's this folder for? What's this folder for? And so that had been the feeling amongst the team at that point, is that we should do something like that. And I felt really strongly and ultimately prevailed in making a very, very simple. So like, it was just very important to me to think through what that initializing process was, because I didn't want a bunch of people to start their first Electron app and then end up with all of these folders that you may not actually need, because you can build anything with Electron. So how could we possibly, you know, guess what kind of default folders and files you should have besides like the bare minimum? So making that process really simple, and then letting the community build the specific ones, you know. So there is, you know, you can go find the awesome-electron repo, and there's loads of things where people have built like, okay, you like using React, like here's an Electron starter in React and stuff. I did not want to prescribe that all Electron apps need to use React, or they need to use this or that. And so so that was important to me. I felt like keeping that initializing experience very simple, and then letting the community build the different flavors. It also made it always thinking about maintainability, because we were also a really, really small team at the time, making it stuff that we could keep up with. And so it would just been absurd for our small team to be even managing ourselves like 7 different flavors of Electron apps, depending on what frameworks the person wants to use, or if they're going to build just a menu bar app or a full desktop app and stuff. So
do you feel that I'm listening to what you're saying, how you're structuring things and how you're organizing things, and do you feel that some of the learnings that you had when you're dealing with architecture, and what I mean building architecture, physical architecture, and design, do you feel that some of those learnings kind of they shaped up how you approach software design as well, and contributed to the kind of software architecture and software design kind of work that you do?
I absolutely do, but it took me a long time to also sort of, I had to get perspective and time to realize that my architecture interest and background is all about how do people experience something? How do I create an environment that feels good to be in, that's not overwhelming, that, you know, in architecture we use like the word circulation. How do you move around a building? But, you know, how do you navigate a code base? How do you navigate documentation? So now in hindsight, I absolutely can see that I'm always thinking about how users, you know, or like, you know, now the product term, or like the user journey essentially is very much, I think, tied to my architecture background.
So what crosses your mind when you look back and you think about Electron? You see today so many applications are created because of Electron. So many people, so many developers, so many other indirect jobs were created because of Electron. What crosses your mind when you think about the impact that your work and the impact that Electron has had in so many people's lives?
I don't know. I guess I'm just like, oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been so many years now, actually, that I mean, the other day it occurred to me, I was using Figma, and I was like, is Figma using Electron? And so I went into the application. I was like, oh, it is. And then I just had a moment. I'm like, that's neat.
Yeah. It's incredible, right?
I think I also, you know, there was a ton of backlash, and likely still is, about, you know, how big Electron apps are and stuff like that. And it never really bothered me because obviously, you know, we want to make it as light and small as it can be. But I just felt like Electron was always, in my mind, going to be like one more stepping stone. There would always be something else after Electron. I was never like, everyone must use Electron and Electron's the best and perfect in every way. To me, it was just like the thing that was going to start spinning up other ideas of how to do it better and stuff. So it's interesting to me because sometimes, like I was telling you, I got really energized by tech and open source because I felt like things were moving so fast. Now that I've done it for over 10 years, there's definitely things I see like, oh, this is still moving really slow, or why isn't there a better version of this? So it's funny the way tech can be both very fast and very slow. So
yeah. And talking about being very fast, how do you see what's going on with AI? How do you see the let's call, I wouldn't call it AI revolution, but how do you see everything that is happening right now, and how do you see the impact that AI is having on the, you know, software development life and people's lives in general?
So I'm kind of an AI humbug, or like I am bummed out by a lot of what I see with AI, and it makes me not. I'm very sort of apprehensive now about what's going on in tech, and will there be things like problems I can work on that are interesting that are just not AI focused? Because I have seen, you know, myself and then talking to friends, just how much it's like this blind, we have to put AI in everything, no matter what, no matter if it makes sense, no matter how much it costs, we've got to put AI in everything. And that's the thing that really bums me out, because I feel like there is still a lack of kind of product craft, of like actually caring about ultimately the thing you're making, because it's just shove AI in no matter what, don't ask questions. That bums me out a lot. I think AI is going to be great for finding cancer. I think it's going to be great for reading loads of documentation at once. It is amazing how much code AI can write for you, but I personally believe there's no way you're not going to still need humans for a very long time to review the code that AI writes. And so I'm most excited about AI for like helping people find cancer. Like,
Absolutely.
than I am like, does every text field I interact with now in an app need to have an AI assistant notification? Drives me nuts. And so I'm hoping there's a bubble burst. Is that too negative to say? But I do hope that bubble bursts a little bit, because I think that people are getting too far from just, making good products that do the thing they're supposed to do.
It's
And
a
they're
tool.
just, yeah.
It's a tool, right? So
Exactly.
and you don't necessarily need to use the tool for everything, but
Yeah.
I mean there'll be, I think, opportunities where the tool can speed up a few things. It can help in a few other things, like you said, cancer
Yeah.
research and protein research. There's lots of applications in those areas as well, right? And talking, we're kind of talking about the future, right? But talking a little bit more about the past and having a little bit more of a philosophical question here. If you had the chance of going back to the beginning of your career or beginning of life, would you have done anything different?
I think the only thing different that I feel like I would do, and I don't think it's been like a huge mistake or anything, but I do think that at one point, a decade ago, I could have focused more on data visualization and data. I think that's just with the way my brain works. I love that. And I kind of feel like, man, I wish I had started on that a long time ago and maybe was doing more sort of data viz stuff. And I would be happy in a spreadsheet all day or just using SQL to do
Fantastic.
stuff. So yeah.
It's fantastic. And like I mentioned to you, os programadores, we have a group in Brazil with 4,000 people, and a lot of people, they have lots of questions, right? So they're trying to start on tech, and they're kind of where you were like 20 years ago or more. And what kind of recommendation you have for those they're starting today? And there's so much information available, and sometimes people struggle to understand which path do they follow. What kind of recommendations would you have for those folks?
My recommendations, and this is just based on really my personal experience. It's not like I've done a giant study and can tell you, the results of the study, but what I have found to be helpful is I think you've got to find things you're actually interested in. I think programming is really tough to get into, and open source is tough to get into if you're not solving a problem you care about. So I think, because you've got to, with anything, you've got to put the time in, right? You've got to work those muscles, you've got to learn. And I think it's so much easier if you can do something, like find anything, make like a fan site. I don't know, I'm very into minimal web and creating moderate websites and small tools and things. And don't think you have to learn everything all at once. You don't have to learn React, but just start building stuff that interests you and talk about it. And I think that's the best chance people have at actually just having enough sort of momentum to keep at something. And I know talking about what you're working on and showing your work early is very scary. And I've done workshops and stuff over the years, and I continue to tell people, you can post more online than you think you can, and things don't have to be polished or perfect. If you can just start working in the open, talking about what you're working on, talk about it on social media, if you can go to local meetups and talk about it. And so find something that interests you enough, some little problem. It can be like a little dinky website, you know, that does one thing or is about one thing, but it's got maybe one part of it that interests you and stuff. And you can start really small and build from there. And I think that, I don't know, at least for me, I find it very hard. And this is my like neurodivergent brain too. It's like, if I'm not interested in the thing, I find it very hard to keep going. And
Absolutely.
I think that there's a lot of small side projects that you can do to just figure out one thing. You don't have to learn the universe at once. You know, if you just want to build a personal website that has like one element in it, like one thing that I would like to do has been on my to-do list is I want my website to have footnotes on the right-hand margin. And I know that's going to take some time for me to figure out, but I'm going to learn stuff in the process and I can talk about it and share about it. And so it can be as small as that, you know.
Super cool. Very good. Very good recommendations. And build something and learn something. So, and have fun through the process.
Yeah.
And Jessica, a little bit more on the personal side of things. You have been pretty open about living with long COVID, right? And I was wondering if you could share a little bit how has it been for you, and what you can recommend to others who have been going through a similar situation as well.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I also need recommendations. So if people have it's hard, and I definitely don't have the answers. And I'm very like, people who will watch this will see that I'm animated and I appear normal and I must seem fine. And that's actually been tricky for me because a lot of the time I have appeared fine, especially since I've been on a lot of medication. But it doesn't mean that's not been really, really hard or that I still have long COVID. And so long COVID can actually be 200 different things because COVID affects every organ in the body. So I have my flavor of long COVID may not be what other people have. So I also can't have like general recommendations that apply to everyone's version. So I haven't had the chronic fatigue and stuff like that, and some of the real serious brain and neurological issues that some people have had. But my specific flavor is massive immune dysfunction. It doesn't even have a name. My doctors they've done every kind of test they can do. They don't have anything to name what is wrong with my immune system now, but COVID destroyed my immune system. I was in hospital with some pretty serious stuff, some pretty like Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which some of these things can be fatal. And if you end up Googling Stevens-Johnson's, it's going to be pretty gross. And it was gross and very scary. And it's because my immune system is reacting in extremely severe ways to things it used to not react to things people wouldn't expect it to react to. I'm allergic to medicines in a very severe way that, you know, I took a medicine I had taken before and it caused my throat to close up and I was in the ambulance going back to the emergency room. And it's like, we can't predict the ways. And I get a full body rash. That is very painful if I'm not on a ton of steroids and immune suppressants. And so, yeah, there's been it's been very terrible and it's been isolating. It's hard to exist in the world. Like, yeah, so I've actually not been working for the last year. I left, I returned to GitHub. I had a first time at GitHub, then worked at some other places, then returned to GitHub, but left a year ago because it was just, it's a lot. It's a lot to chase doctors. It's a lot to chase doctors who don't know what's wrong with you, who don't even know about COVID. It's a lot to find help when you have a specific kind of long COVID. And so I took off to try and focus on getting just to see, basically, because I was like, this is my one life. And luckily I could afford to take some time off. And I was like, if there's anything I can do on my end to de-stress, not work as much, and try and see if that helps my immune system. There's not been any miracle that's happened or 180. I'm still having issues, still fighting for appointments and stuff. So it's not there's no silver bullet, and it's been
Absolutely.
really hard.
Yeah. And thank you for being so open about that. So I think it's, by doing what you're doing is you're helping others as well, right? So you're helping people understand that they're not the only ones going through the same kind of experience that you're describing, right?
That would be so important for people out there who are having, I mean, even people who have lost their sense of taste. Some people have, lost half their hair. There's a whole spectrum, of long COVID impacts. And I still, interact with so many people who when I have to, even if it's like a person at the bank or like a person I had to order new windows from, when somehow my long COVID comes up or I can't respond to emails all of the time and having downtime, people are like, oh, I didn't know that was still a thing. Is that still a thing? And it really amazes me. And it is like, on top of the isolation, like I've seen one friend for 15 minutes in the last 3 months. Like it's extremely isolating, which is like mentally very difficult. But on top of the actual, physical isolation, there's this psychological isolation because the world is acting like actually like who knew COVID was still a thing. And so for anyone out there that is battling with it, you're definitely not alone. And there are those of us out there still masking, still taking care of ourselves in the community.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people in the scientific community looking into this and trying to make things better as well, right? So we gotta work with those folks, and hopefully there'll be better treatments that can help get things under the level that they have to be. And again, thank you for being so open. Thank you for sharing that, which is
thank you for letting me talk about it.
No, it's I think it's part of what we need to do, right? So as the whole idea here, the podcast is helping others, and it doesn't necessarily mean just helping others talking about the software. We are all people, right? We all have a challenge in our lives, right? So it's important to speak about those things as well.
Yeah.
Changing.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I will say, I don't know. I feel like, I've talked, animated and excited about things I've worked on and stuff. But I mean, long COVID has also been like I said, like I haven't been working for a year. I've not been active on social media like I have. I'm not doing any fun side projects. And so it's really fun to talk to you about these things. And it is like also sort of, I don't like confusing in a way, because I'm like, I feel like I have lost a bit of that identity with my past self, who was so energized, so active and stuff. And that has not felt like me for the last, I mean, I've had long COVID now for 2.5 years. I've not been working for a year. And even before this year off, I had 6 months medical leave because of the long COVID. So it has felt, it's really, it's interrupted my life and career and tech. And so
it's an incredible impact, right, to your life and to everything that you do. And again, thank you for taking time to speak with me, because it's not easy, right? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And changing topic a little bit, do you have any recommendations about books or music or films or anything that doesn't necessarily mean tech related? I'm not sure if people are writing about long COVID, right? So what can you share in terms of recommendations about anything you want to recommend to the audience?
Oh, I consume a lot of weird stuff that I don't know. Like I watch a lot of US trials. I stream trials. I really have found it soothing, and I really like that there's structure to the legal system, and so that makes my brain happy. So that's something I've done a lot recently. I've been trying to do like craft projects. I've done bookbinding and stuff. I'm reading fiction books. I do try and read COVID studies. Sometimes I get into like a COVID studies research day and then it just scares me too much and I have to stop. But I've also shown up with scientific studies to my doctor's appointments, which I don't know that they appreciate. Yeah. Gosh, so I feel like I don't know if I have recommendations that
That's
might
okay.
fit
That's
a lot
okay.
of people.
Yeah. I was thinking about you showing up to your doctor and showing Electron documentation to them. That can scare them.
Yeah. My love of spreadsheets, which has been around since my Code for America project, which was a spreadsheet-based project, spreadsheets as databases. When I show up to doctor's appointments now, they are always, and because of just whatever the system, I'm often seeing a doctor I've never seen before, and I have to like explain to them the last 2 years of some of these things I've had are genuinely 1 in a million severe immune reactions. And so I have to explain this complex 2.5 years, and I make spreadsheets, I make PowerPoints and stuff. And I catalog my images of all of the rashes and stuff. And so I still maintain a lot of spreadsheets and logs now, just for symptom tracking.
Yeah. It's not easy at all. And Jessica, we have been talking for almost 1 hour here. Are there any questions that I did not ask that you wished I had asked?
I don't know. I don't think, maybe I can just sort of talk about my hopes for things.
Absolutely.
I hope that there is a bit of a corporate AI bubble burst and that we kind of get back to building products that are solving real problems and getting excited about building tools that are changing lives and making lives easier. I hope that the web gets more approachable rather than less approachable, that I would love to see a resurgence, and I have seen stuff and a resurgence in personal blogs and RSS and little sites like that really excite me. And so I'm hoping that's what I'm paying attention to and trying to do myself. So I hope there's more of a smaller web.
Hope is a good thing. Hope is a really good thing.
Yeah.
Hope everywhere. And Jessica, before we close, do you have any, do you want to mention your website, LinkedIn, anything that our audience can use to contact you?
Yeah, my website is jlord.computer. Now I just recently got that. And I'm genuinely, I spent the last 2 weeks trying to talk myself up to like getting back online. So I'm hoping I'm going to get back like on Blue Sky. I do have Blue Sky, is jlord, also
Fantastic.
on Blue Sky. Yeah, my email's out there. People can email me. Yeah.
Incredible. And Jessica, it's been a privilege speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking time to, spend here your mid-afternoon and my early morning here for me. So greatly appreciated.
Thank you. It was really, really lovely talking to you.
Thank you very much. And just stay with me for 2 minutes. I'm going to stop recording. I'll talk with you. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Let me push the button here to stop.